Systems engaged. Stand by to receive transmission. Coming to you from a recording studio somewhere in the multiverse. This is Robots from Tomorrow. This show about comics is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your podcatcher of choice. If you like what we do here, subscribing, liking, rating, and reviewing the show helps more of your fellow humans find out about us and is greatly appreciated. For more information about the show and our archive of over 800 episodes, go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Now, here is your host, Greg.
Hello and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg, glad to have you with us. I'm especially glad to see so many new followers over on Blue Sky. Be it the Twitter exodus or just plain curiosity, it's been fantastic seeing folks checking out the show, and I think we've been doing pretty well since coming back from hiatus, giving you chats with Michelle Fife and Joe Illidge. But no offense to them or anyone else I've had the pleasure to talk to for Robots, today's interview with comics historian, lecturer, curator Paul Gravett is probably one of my all-time favorites. As I mentioned on our first show back, I recorded my talk with Paul back in April of this year and was trying to get it out before things ground to a halt behind the scenes. That obviously didn't happen, but it's here now, and I honestly believe Paul brings so much comics knowledge and enthusiasm to our discussion that no amount of time can make it not worth a listen. At the risk of overselling it, if I haven't done that already, it's a slice of optimism and positivity that I think does even more good to hear now than it would have back when we recorded it. Today, we have the audio version of this chat, but Paul kept chucking so many ideas at me. I knew this interview had to have a video component, so next Thursday, we'll be releasing a full video slideshow version of this episode on our YouTube channel, which means if you don't want to watch the game this Thanksgiving and haven't yet succumbed to a tryptophan coma, you can put on this video instead. Moving into December, we've got our Shelfbound episode with Brian Salvatore on Crisis on Infinite Earths and probably one of the comm panels from this past summer's convention season. There's some really great episodes from that category to choose from. Of course, you can always find us on Blue Sky at rftpodcast.bsky.social and on our website at robotsfromtomorrow.net, or just subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and we'll just zap all our episodes directly to your device. But enough of me yakking. Here's my chat with the man at the crossroads of Comica, Paul Gravett. Cartoonist Eddie Campbell has dubbed today's guest the man at the crossroads in his graphic novel, ALEC, How to Be an Artist. He writes, quote, "The cycle of renewal in art is peddled by the periodic influx of stuff from somewhere else. That's why you need a man at the crossroads. He will be the purest, most fresh-faced wee fellow you have ever met. His ingenuous enthusiasm will beam from his cheery countenance." End quote. The fellow I'm chatting with today has been observing, studying, and directing comics traffic for over 40 years. As his understanding of its ebbs and flows has grown over that time, so has his endeavors in making sense of it for himself, and thankfully, comics fans around the globe. He's written at least 7 books. MANGASIA, the definitive guide to Asian comics, has been touring the world for the last several years as Asian Comics, Evolution of an Art Form. As described on the Barbican International Enterprises website, quote, "Curated with a team of more than 20 international advisors, Asian Comics features over 500 works, the largest selection of artworks from the continent, including Japanese woodblock prints, Hindu scroll paintings, digital media, printed comics, and contemporary illustrations. This unique exhibition is a gateway to an unexplored world of graphic storytelling and its artistic value." End quote. He's also an accomplished editor and anthology curator. Among the books he's assembled have been 2011's 1001 Comics You Must Read Before You Die, which is a fantastic title, and the mammoth book of best crime comics, which Mike and I took a dive into for episode 670. He's contributed to countless periodicals and documentaries about comics. He's published one of the best comics magazines of the 1980s, Escape, with partner Peter Stanbury, giving a platform to such creators as James Robinson, Dave McKean, and Neil Gaiman. He started Comica, the London International Comics Festival, with John Harris Dunning in 2003. He gives lectures, he hosts panels, and he continues to be one of the most respected comics patrons of his generation. Frankly, I am exhausted just trying to narrow down his endeavors to a reasonable summary for this introduction. He is, of course, Paul Gravett, and I'm absolutely thrilled to get a chance to talk to him today about his time in and around all sorts of comics. Paul, how are you doing?
Hello, Greg. I'm doing very well. And what a great intro. Thank you. Yes, it is. I have trouble through
Did I miss anything major in that?
Well, I have had a couple of books out since MANGASIA, because MANGASIA, the book, came out in
Mhm.
2017. So since then, I've done two monographs for Thames, and had one on Posy Simmonds and one on Tove Jansson.
Mhm.
Been very successful too, and have spun off into exhibitions, and there are still things developing on both of those. I tell people I don't spin, the phrase is to spinning plates, I think is the
Mhm.
term I come
Mhm.
across when you're doing too many things at once. Well, I'm spinning entire dinner services.
You're
Free,
spinning tables.
just tables, or yeah, just the whole
Yeah,
lot.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I am passionate about the medium, quite obviously slightly nuts about the medium, and I want to know about everything. Basically, I'm
Mhm.
omnivorous and insatiable, but I'm probably also very demanding. I want to find stuff that's pushing that maybe from the past, in fact, that has been
Mhm.
innovative, that makes this art form continue to expand and surprise us in so many ways. And that, fortunately, is happening so much. I mean, we're in an extraordinary period now, I think. So it's very, very encouraging. Yeah.
Touching on that, one of the impressive things about your career is the breadth of your coverage of comics. Thinking back, what was the first thing you remember learning about comics that gave you that paradigm shift in your understanding of what they could be?
Yeah. I think a key thing for me was probably, certainly a key book, was Maurice Horn edited World Encyclopedia of Comics, which
Sure.
came out in the mid 70s. Even before then, I was lucky to have had some holidays in Europe with my family. We went to Germany and Austria and France and other places. And because I was lucky enough also to learn French and German at school, my German was very
Mm.
rusty, but my French was okay. Reading comics was a great way, again, to learn, improve your language, but also just to discover more comics. So that linguistic aspect was important too. But the World Encyclopedia was something I went through. Actually, I was a bit later. I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I used to
Mm.
go to the university library once a week, and I would just actually go through every page of the book. I didn't own it. I just
Mhm.
went. This is in the late 70s, and I just every single entry was like a window into a whole other area of comics I didn't know about. And
Hmm.
it's a crucial point as well, is that many people, and I completely understand why, either think they've outgrown comics. Certainly my friends at school, all except one collector pal of mine who basically loved American comics as I did. We both collected them, but he went off and explored much more, buying Golden Age ones, which I couldn't really afford to buy. He was exploring all that history, and I loved that too. But
Mm.
so people usually get to a point when other things take an interest. It might be boys or girls or music or something else. And certainly if
Mhm.
you stick to the comics you love, it might just be, I love Batman or Spider-Man, then that's fine. And I can
Mhm.
understand, actually, I understand in retrospect, it's probably a healthy thing to do what I'm doing, which is to want to know about everything. But
Mhm.
I'm also very grateful for the fact that, as I am quite open and receptive and also quite critical, although I don't want to be
Mhm.
outspoken. People are able to make the comments the way they want to, of course, but I'm looking
Mhm.
for the new. I was lucky that I also, another a key point I would say, in the same period of the 70s, was back in London, finding Japanese bookshops. There used to be at least two,
Mm.
one big one near St. Paul's Cathedral, would you believe,
Mm.
which were importing manga books and magazines. They were all in blasted plastic, so you couldn't get
Mm.
them home. I thought, I'm
Mhm.
just going to have to buy one. This looks good. And I bought a magazine, and it was the first manga magazine I ever bought. I've still got it. It was a copy, I think, of Shonen magazine. It
Mm.
had this fantastic fishing comic in it. Fishing Crazy Senpai, I think it's quite a well-known one in Japan. It hasn't been translated, I don't think. And it had this
Mm.
incredible double-page spread that looked like some kind of Hokusai print with a fish filling most of the image, the boy kind of struggling to hold it on the end of his fishing rod. And I never thought, this is fishing. I'm not interested in fishing, but this is like amazing. And the art was so, it was in black and orange. It was part of the two color section. And of
Mm.
course, that's the key thing I would say about comics, is that there is a barrier. Of course, if you can't read them, you're not getting, in every case, the full content and ideas. But there's the reading the pictures is something that, of course, we can all do. And I think having no fear of language. As far as
Mm.
I'm concerned, I have enough bits of it, Spanish and Italian and other bits and pieces. And I studied Latin at school, and I loved Latin, which of course is useful. And then there's Asian language as well. I'd love to read all of those too. But the thing is also the pictures can do so much for us. So these were all key moments, really, of going, there is no reason to stop, no reason to confine myself.
That does seem to be a very fortunate turn of events to have a roadmap of the breadth of comics so early that you never got pigeonholed into comics are Batman.
Yeah, or I'm interested only in this bit of it, or this is my favorite character. I'm not terribly attached to characters. I'm much more attached to creators who also go on and surprise. I came up with this strange kind of credo, which I didn't really think I really lived by, but I was in Sao Paulo at a conference. It just popped into my head, and I think it was no nostalgia, no loyalties, no limits.
Nice.
Now that boils down to the fact that I don't have a lot of nostalgia. I mean, I do like stuff from my childhood, and I can still just say the word 5. And if you're a Thunderbirds fan, you know that is the exact note that Jeff Tracy says at the beginning of the Thunderbirds TV show, which my brother and I loved. And you just say 5 and then 4 and then etc. And then, but my nostalgia gene is a little bit broken, I think, because I'm hungry to see new stuff, which is new to me. It might be from a century ago, 2 centuries ago. Who knows where it might be from. I'm also quite convinced that we just don't see a big enough picture of comics, any of us really. And as I said earlier, I understand that. I think if you do what I do, your brain has to be pretty scrambled up, because I'm just looking at so many things, wanting to connect things, understand things. And for most people, comics is a wonderful place of fantasy and visual imagination and stimulation. Nostalgia, of course, is certainly part of it sometimes, and you're often very attached to certain characters or even whole companies. You know, this is why I use the phrase no loyalty, because I'm afraid that loyalty applies to companies. It also, I'm afraid, does apply to creators, because I'm continually going, it's okay, but it's like anybody, a rock band, for example, that I'm into soul and funk, so I love Earth, Wind and Fire, but we know they had good albums and bad albums. People do kind of get into a shtick, and a shtick means you get stuck, basically. I'm always wanting people, I don't want more of the same. Don't mind if you reinvent yourself. I mean, this is why great artists like Kirby or Moebius are limitless. They just go on staggering you, even when they're supposedly coasting. Yeah.
You touched on this towards the end of your answer. How do you keep all of these perpendicular lines of comics in your head?
Oh yeah, well, I'm getting on a bit here. I mean, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I'm a mature turkey or something. I don't know. But the fact is that it is stimulating. Comics are very powerful things. I know people have mapped what goes on in the brain. They've done the eye tracking thing when we're reading or looking on a comics page. We're special people as comics. We really are. Creators too, but readers too, because you're activating so much more in your head. Now that's obviously changing now with smartphones and the internet, but we were there ages ago. And still, there are things that comics do that the fleeting, disappearing image, whether you're just swiping it on your smartphone or it's a film or something like this, something durational, in other words, that comics doesn't have that problem. It actually stays around, allows you to linger and explore. That whole braiding theory, which Terry Grenstein came up with, where comics, certainly this has changed obviously with webtoons, but with print comic, you can kind of inhabit it. There's even a phrase called document literacy, where you have to get to understand all of the things that the comic artists, the creators have put into the thing, how it works, how the techniques they're using, maybe there's some of the symbols, the little things that are planted throughout the book, which might link you back. And the very fact that you're not trapped into this kind of next image, next image, next image. You are able to move around and you refer back, look ahead, all of that. It's a very, very powerful medium. And I still don't think anything's beaten it, to be honest with you. But I do worry that not much of that is being lost with the webtoon format as it is at the moment. As I've discussed it a few times, the whole infinite canvas that we thought web comics online would offer, and of course they do still, in some cases when they are still using their real potential, has been squeezed into this drip feed of one image at a time. And I must confess, I'm not terribly good at digital reading. I prefer print. But I won't show you because I've got so many books.
We all do.
Yeah, we all have. But there's no such thing, Greg, as too many books or too many comics.
Obviously, there's something to that. Being able to inhabit the work
Mm.
of print over video, but certainly in comics, I've mentioned this on the show before, especially for like historical comics or nonfiction comics. I feel like it's in some ways one of the perfect mediums for that, because you can move at your own pace. But then when they're talking about a certain type of dress or a certain type of thing, if you don't know what that word is, you go and look it up and like, oh, that's what the thing is, and build it into your mental picture. In comics, it's all there and you can inhabit it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes. Alan Moore, as you know, at the moment, has been taking quite a departure from comics, and is quite correctly and justly getting fantastic acclaim for his literary prowess, from Jerusalem to the new projects he's doing, including this upcoming 5-novel series called Long London that's launching in October, which I'm sure is going to be superb. We know he's a master of words. But he was interviewed for the British Library. They had a recent exhibition here called Fantasy Realms of Imagination, which is going to the Bowers Museum just after the Asian Comics show finishes. And he was being interviewed and mentioned that there's an unlimited potential for literature because of the power of just 26 letters and a sprinkling of punctuation. I agree, but we've got those 26 letters and plenty of punctuation if you want it. Probably too many exclamation marks, actually, in comics. But we also have pictures.
Yes.
And hell, what you can do with pictures. And this is why I read too many comics, and I've struggled reading, I'll be honest with you, I don't read very much prose-only text unless it's about comics. But I don't read very many novels. And when I have, I'm always hugely impressed with them. I know if I had another brain, I'd be able to cope with all of that. But I also know what I find frustrating sometimes is that the reams of paragraphs in Lord of the Rings, for example, where Tolkien is describing battles and beautiful landscapes. Now, I know I should be able to really appreciate that, but because I am a visual person as well as a verbal person, I just think you could draw this. You could get, and that the artists have drawn, for example.
Yeah.
And so you don't really need all this attempt to kind of describe it, viridian perfection or whatever it might be. And I certainly never follow the battles. The battles were always just like, I'm sorry, I mean, you've lost me here with all these flanks and whatever else it was. It was too difficult for me to follow. I wanted to see Kirby choreograph it. And you'd feel it, and you wouldn't need to have all the description. So we know, I mean, you and I know, Greg, there's an unlimited multiversity to comics. This is such an incredible medium, but the snag is that so far it still is undertapped, I think, what it can do, and that's partly because of the need for industrial level production, which fortunately we don't have so much of. There's more room now of individual dream projects that might be almost unimaginable, certainly in an economic sense, but people do it anyway, and we've had those for many years now. But also because I believe that we're still trying to figure out, can we get more writing into comics? This is why I'm quite a champion of what Posy Simmonds has done, even though she says, I love to write as much as I love to draw. And part of the current tension, I feel slightly, with what's coming through in the waves of new graphic novels is we know that's not the case with the enormous number of people who come to comics. They want to get drawing some more panels immediately. And especially if you give them, look, you've got 200 or 300 pages, just go. Then Posy knows the power of words. She's a very literary person. That shouldn't be surprising to us, but it does mean I feel that we need that brought in, because we can read comics in this way. And I think our example has not yet really had many imitators. There's barely a handful. And it seems to me, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Cerebus, where Dave Simite thinks dropped in some quite large, or rather kind of indigestible chunks. And this was kind of that's really well. I mean, remember those Byron Price visual novels? I think like Howard Chaykin illustrated Stars My Degradation and other things where they were kind of a bit heavy, and the writing, it was like, well, it's writing with some pictures, and it wasn't
right. There was a clear separation.
I think it's taking comics forward, but I do think text is going to take comics forward when you have people that can really understand how to use it. And there are not many examples of that. And I think I'm unlocking that. My other area, I really want, many other areas I want to see, but I really want to see photography really being used in comics, and not the kind of photo fumetti. Nothing wrong with photo fumetti, but they usually, everyone looks so stagey and hammy and kind of or whatever, all these terrible photographs, romance comics or even horror photo comics. And it's underexplored. And in fact, in the photographic world, there's a real resistance to narrative. We're talking about the art world generally being resistant to narrative. But there are people like Ray Michaels and a few others who have pushed it forward. And it seems to be so obvious that we should be doing more, can do so much more with this. So that's one of my many interests of what we could be doing, and show a project that could be developed out of that, I think.
Yeah.
That's enough.
No. It's never enough. It sort of blew my mind. It's like, okay, photo comics that aren't like a fumetti type of. Although I guess maybe fumetti would be the exaggeration or whatever. If you had photographic images used in a more neutral or pointed way.
Surely. We know the range in photography is extraordinary. I forget the name of these. There's Gregory Crewdson, I think that's the name, isn't it? I think he makes these huge photographs which have the budget of a movie, and they look like a still from a movie, and they are absolutely pregnant with unsettling, disturbing sort of ideas and narrative implied and everything. And just imagine if you could get him to make a graphic novel, or just to take that approach and then say, well, yes, and you can incorporate some text maybe, and who knows? I mean, it wouldn't turn into film, and this is the whole thing, but photography has got that potential to add a whole new and generative element to comics. It's not just tacky. I quite like tacky photo comics. I've got no problem.
Everything has its place, but some of the things are expanding and pushing other things off the table that you don't want to have pushed off the table. So in the interest of not going completely into a different tangent and touching on the things that brought you here, recent and new projects, exhibitions, books, travels, and more.
This gives you some idea of some of the things that I'm involved with. This is an example of where me discovering, thanks to a fantastic guy we've lost, a great Brazilian comics historian I met in I don't remember now, 2001? No, it would be 1991 or something like that, 92. At the first Rio de Janeiro Comics Biennale, I went there. Guests were Möbius and Munoz and Sampaio and Will Eisner. And it was just like, what am I doing here? It's incredible. Enki Bilal, for example. And then amongst this new friend showed me some of these amazing horror comics that Brazil has, where unlike America or other countries too, for that matter, where the horror comics got stamped out, in Brazil they continued and they flourished, and they had amazing artists working on them. This guy, Jayme Cortez, was born in Portugal but made his career in Brazil. And the covers, these are 2 volumes of all of his outstanding horror comic covers. They are up there with anything you've seen anywhere else around the world. They're tremendous, and they are pretty much famous in Brazil, but they're not known internationally that well. And what happened is, through him, I got to meet a biographer of Jayme Cortez. I got to meet a collector named Sky Ott. And I managed to find a British publisher here in London that was doing beautiful books of this kind of horror comic artwork. Carrera Press is the company over here. And that all put together with Fabio Moraes, the biographer, getting permission from the family, we were able to make these 2 volumes of every cover, including fabulous preparatory stuff, but including the photographs that Jayme set up in his studio to develop these hyper photorealistic covers. So that's just come out last year, and I'm off to a festival in Beja in Portugal in June, where they're going to have a launch, and hopefully Fabio will be well enough. He's had an injury, sadly, to come from Sao Paulo, and we can finally get to meet. But that's the Crossroads, because I'm not by any means expert on this. I've written a little forward for one of the books, but connecting, and great things can happen if you can put the pieces together. And this is the show that's coming up at the end of May. It opens on the 29th. I'm going over on the 28th for the private view and preview of it all. And this is a staggering exhibition. This is only one of the exhibitions, the main one, the main focused exhibition. This is the exhibition catalog as well, which I've contributed to. And the idea of the Pompidou's had is they have a new director called Laurent Lebon, who basically has from the very beginning insisted that comics are going to be included now in the remit of the Centre Pompidou, which is the National Modern Art, Contemporary Art, whatever, Museum of France. They haven't had hardly anything in their collections, but they've done important exhibitions. And in this case, they're going to have a whole gallery full of comic art, some remarkable work covering these 60 years. It's obviously not global. And I did have a chat with the curatorial and their advisors at the beginning, but they didn't listen an awful lot because it's pretty difficult to do something as expansive. This is the first stage. I talked again to Monsieur Le Bon. He said, yes, this is a big statement doing this show, but it's not going to be just like a one-off and then we forget about it. There's going to be already been doing a lot of one-off solo exhibitions in their public library, but this is the first time they've done a really big show in one of their aircraft hangars. These giant spaces that are made for fine art, because we all know the reason that comics suffer in the art gallery above all is they're not big enough. But the only thing to do to make art is to make it big, because the spaces in the galleries are so big. But what they're also brilliantly doing is they're doing a whole program over the same period. It's over from end of May till November 4th. Every floor, every level of the Pompidou, which you may know is a multi-level 6-7-story building, is going to have comics exhibitions or elements in it. Some solo shows, some mixed theme shows is one, but also, very interestingly, in their permanent show or gallery space for contemporary art that covers tons of stuff through the 20th century, etc. They're going to introduce works of comics, original artworks, next to the appropriate pieces of art. So there'll be a kind of dialogue or dissonance or something going on between that. They've done it before with, for example, with fashion, with garments, with amazing work, works of fashion. Now they're going to do it for the whole period. So that even I'm just thinking, if you're a Pompidou visitor, I'm going to the Pompidou today, I don't want to see any of this comics rubbish. I'm going to go just to the museum. And there, and there's fine comics. They're even there. They can't just... So it's a very important development. For the catalogue I got to do, for the French one, I've interviewed Joe Sacco. He has an amazing new graphic novel coming out, probably in French and English at the same time. It deals with extreme tensions between Hindus and Muslims in India. Biggest book. I mean, it weighs 5 kilos. I know that because I use 5 kilo weights for my of keeping trim. But it's a schlock and a huge book, but it's fabulous. And it's an interesting project. It hasn't officially been published quite yet. It's coming out more properly in the autumn, I think. We just had a preview of it. And the background here is it's called the SAWWAF collection because it's named after Mutaz SAWWAF, who is an amazing man from Beirut, from Lebanon, completely passionate about comics. He fell in love particularly with Mad and wanted to be he is a cartoonist. He made a career. His dad actually said, well, look, I don't think you ought to be a cartoonist. You're not going to make enough money doing that. Go and get qualified as an architect, but then I'll pay for you to go and get some comics lessons. I think I may even come over to the UK. Anyway, the point is that Mutaz grew up with a love of comics and made a lot of money in architecture and has built up a fantastic collection, not just of original artworks, but also books, and now is set up a center for Arab comic studies at the American University in Beirut. I went to it last July. And I'm on the advisory board. They've been doing awards now, 10 years next year. Some very important awards for comics and cartooning and children's books across the whole Arab region. So he's just a dynamic sort of innovator and collector. And I had the chance to work with him and with the co-editor and publisher of the book, Greg Hill. And it's a sumptuous book. It's much more than it might have been. It could have just been a nice book of here's all the stuff I've got and you haven't. Which is but much better than that because it's not just I've written, but we've got Lee Lawrence, we've got I forget her name, Amber Wendy, somebody other who's the expert on Mad. We've had, and it's got some great contributors, great essays and biographies of all the artists, and it's a beautiful book. And this thing is not the standard edition. There's only about 20 of these that have been printed for the contributors, so you can't buy the giant one. You don't want the giant one, actually. You can barely lift it. So the standard one is a lovely book. So that's coming shortly. And then a couple of exhibitions I've been doing recently. I had the chance to work with a festival in Lausanne. This is tying into my Asian comics interests. I mean, passionately. Taiwan's got a comics culture that's just waiting to be more widely discovered. Certainly, it hasn't crossed over enough yet. It's just starting in English. A book that came out called The Boy from Clearwater. It's published by Levine Carrido, 2 volumes, and it is essentially a kind of mouse or Persepolis for Taiwan, looking through one man's life. Happens to be a man who worked in comics and was imprisoned because of what he did in comics under Chiang Kai-shek, under the White Terror. But the story also, of course, explains what happened to Taiwan post-1945, and it's a beautiful book. Anyway, that's fortunately in French, and a whole wave of stuff is coming out from Taiwan. I mean, France is, without doubt, there's no other country like it in the world for comics. I mean, I know there are wonderful ones, Japan and Italy, come to mind, America, Britain, etc. But there's no country that's more open and receptive. I'm astonished, really, that they keep on going, yeah, look at that. We've got this. We want to see this in French. We want to see this in French. They are just the most receptive nation. We know that Japan isn't really. Japan doesn't need to be receptive. There's so much stuff already.
Yeah. They're like, no, we're good.
We've got plenty, thank you. Yeah. And the comics culture has grown up on that basis, really, that we're not making this stuff to export, we're making it for us. And if you like it, well, we didn't think you would be able to read it when it was first being exported. But Taiwan is now getting much more work in French, and that's opened it up certainly for many more people to discover. This exhibition was in a most bizarre location. It was actually in the station, the central station in Lausanne in Switzerland, part of the Bédéfil Festival, which has just come under completely new management. 2 fantastically bright women who've just come in with loads of experience and loads of ideas and just re-energized it and just had brilliant ideas. And it was a great project to work on. It's all print-based, of course. It's not artwork because it was almost outside. But it was a wonderful location, using the length of the platforms to display the artwork. What I wanted to do, of course, is, and I still want someone to let me do it, is to put an exhibition inside a train. Because one, obviously, where you can go through from one compartment to the next, one carriage to the next, and have it would just be a wonderful, rather like the Russian propaganda trains. I think they used to travel around with cinema or something on them, I think. Anyway, that's Taiwan and Lausanne. And then shortly after that, last year, actually 3 new centers opened for comics in the world. One in Taiwan, which I went to over Christmas, which took some negotiation from my partner and family. But anyway, I was Christmas getting to a comics museum opening in Taichung in Taipei. This is in Łódź in Poland, and they've opened it last October. It's the most amazing, huge industrial space that's been adapted into these 2 twin towers almost, with fantastic murals on the outside by Kim Jung-gi, the Korean artist who we sadly lost. He designed the images of the then enlarged onto these things. And it's just jammed with stuff, really good stuff. But it has a lot also to do with gaming and the game industry. It's combining those 2. And it was a hugely impressive thing to experience. And then the other 2 museums, well, there was a new one in Pordenone in Italy, which I haven't been to yet, which is very kind of almost a sort of stately home, kind of very, very nice indeed. There are more new comics centers, projects going on all the time around the world that we are seeing the growth of this, which is very exciting too, I think. And then this is the big show that I was able to do with the Pompidou last October. And right into the book that I did on Posy, a monograph. There's also a new French catalogue, which I wrote the captions and text for, to go with the exhibition, specifically for the French one. And here on the right, you can see Posy getting her Fauve, which is the wildcat statue designed by Louis Trondheim as the mascot of Angoulême. Talking about turning points, going to Angoulême for the first time in 1984. Well, once you go, as far as I'm concerned, you have to go every year after that. How would you ever not to go back? It is such an amazing experience. There's no other festival like it culturally, because it's 100% comic. You haven't got Hugh Jackman walking around in a Wolverine outfit, wanted to be recognized and not. I heard that story about San Diego.
Really?
Yes. I don't know if that's true or not. It's maybe apocryphal. But
well, it sounds great. But everything I've heard about Angoulême is, like you said, all comics all the time.
Now, it's astonishing. So Posy Simmonds won the Grand Prix this year, so there will be an exhibition of some sort for her, I'm sure, next year, and I may be involved, but she really deserves it. She's the first British person to win it, and I think maybe I should know. It's about the 4th, I think only the 4th woman in some 50-something years to win it. So the exhibition was such a pleasure to work on. I've done several. This is possibly even my 9th or 10th exhibition I worked on for Posy, but this was one where there was a very, very bright team to work with at the library, I was more of an advisor than truly a co-curator. And there were some brilliant ideas from the scenographer, the designer of the whole thing. And having to make it work for a primarily French audience was also very interesting. And so, yeah, it was just a complete pleasure to do that. And then we come to this show I also put together last year and is still touring around the UK and is about to go off to Athens. It's going to be translated into Greek for the festival there called Comicdom. I'm going out there in about 2 weeks, I think, to talk about manga. And this is a show that just basically does what it says on the tin, make my manga. It's explaining manga to a general audience through printed banners and lots of great graphics. And some great spotlight artists like Junko Mizuno and Ando Yoshimizu and others. And then we come to Asian Comics, the new version of the show that originally began in 2017? Yeah, 2017. It opened in Rome, and it's now revamped, updated, and touring not just now until September 8th, I think it is, at the Bowers Museum, which is in Orange County, California, right next to Disneyland, actually. The Ayers Hotel I was staying in, the breakfast was amazing. Everybody was dressed up, ready to go to Disney. They all got their outfits. It was wonderful, really wonderful. And the Bowers Museum is an interesting space because it's got world art. It's got stuff from Asia and Oceania and lots of places, Mexico, etc. And they are wide open. They thought they'd never done comics before, but in fact, we found out that they had done back in the 70s. And what's nice is that just before this, they had a big show of Hokusai brought over from the British Museum. And that made them think, well, actually, this would be a nice segue. People have found their way through to Hokusai. Let's take them into Asian comics.
People can think, Asian comics, yeah, I've read a manga. I know what I'm going to see there. But of course, Asian comics really covers the continent and it expands out. As you were working on MANGASIA, how did you wrap your head around the evolution of comics in Asia? Because in the book and in the exhibition, you obviously covered Japan, but also China, Korea, Taiwan, Mongolia, India. Like, it is incredibly expansive. Talk about your growing understanding of Asian comics as you were working on the book and maybe the exhibition as well.
Yeah, my understanding has come a lot from not just from the comics, but from making connections to people involved in comics in these countries, reaching out. It's even better, even easier. Now, back in the day, I used to have to write letters. I wrote lots of letters, but I was in the 80s doing Escape. Of course, we didn't have the internet, for example. But the networking, going to festivals, finding artists, finding publishers, and finding historians and collectors, all of that has meant that I was able to tap into that enormous knowledge base that I couldn't pretend to have myself. And in terms of structuring the book, I didn't do it the way you might have thought, which is because the brilliant John Lent, who I dedicate the book to, was already working on a book called Asian Comics. I didn't know, I'm sure if I was aware of that, that does the job of giving you country by country, excluding Japan. John, quite rightly, his decision was Japan's had so much coverage and we can't squeeze that history in as well. Let's just talk about everything else. I mean, certainly a huge range of other countries. And he does a fantastic job. And he does some interconnecting, but I felt that's not the approach I wanted to take. And that was partly because I felt that perhaps a way for a broader audience to access this is they're not going to want to know, I want to know about this history and this history. We can connect it thematically and by general things in terms of influences of artists whose work was translated, whether it's Dragon Ball or Tezuka, whatever, Toriyama, I mean. But I mean, in other words, the way that manga has had undoubtedly, of course, an enormous effect on almost every Asian country's comics output, but also to try and zone in on what are the unique features from each country, what are the key innovators there. And as I say, organizing it thematically enabled me to suddenly think, look, we don't have to have multiple histories. We have one history of the shared, complicated, interwoven history of Asia. And how is that reflected? Whether it's in historically propagandist material from the past, or can we look at biographical material now or historical documentary comics now that have gone back? Everything from obviously Barefoot Gen is perhaps the most obvious one from Japan about the bombing of Hiroshima, but there are many others from every country. And that enabled the whole concept of the book, which then developed at the same time into an exhibition, which is not what I was expecting. The two things together, that will melt your brain. Meant that the whole thing had an energy to it, which meant that we were thinking of, we've got to reach the public that's going to be reading and also experiencing an exhibition. And it's probably a mad project. I think John had the much more sensible approach in his Asian comics book to let's just get the information down. That information obviously was invaluable to me. It also helped having, as you mentioned, advisors. There was no question when the Barbican approached me and said, look, we like what you've done, other exhibitions we've seen. Do you want to do something around comics and what are you researching? I told them about MANGASIA. I said, this sounds like something we could take on and possibly tour. And I think the key thing was that it wasn't just manga. Manga was the Trojan horse. You come because it's got manga in the front of it. And even now, of course, Asian comics perhaps doesn't have that buzz, but we know it's manga is the thing everyone knows about when you say Asian comics. But I think there is a lot more to it. It's more complicated and nuanced. And I think the show therefore benefits from that thematic approach.
I can't remember where I was looking at some images from. It was basically a slideshow going from like Bangladesh to Bhutan to Cambodia to China and so on and so forth, seeing the different approaches to what are clearly comics. And thinking back to something you had said on a previous interview, I want to say a couple of months ago, talking about the Japanese willingness or not to recognize the influence of American comics on their comics. You know, sort of the idea of comics spreading out through Asia. We get to see that type of ebb and flow, at least sort of imparts the information that there is a range of influences, stronger or less stronger, but comics are still comics. Does that, I don't want to say give you hope, but is that a inspiring idea to see that comics can be so many different things and things you may not have expected to see?
And still be comics, whereas you could find your way into them. Yeah, that's definitely important to me. Just, again, broadening the perspectives, broadening the horizons of, even if you don't get a chance to know everything about each country's history, I mean, you should go to John Lent's book for that. The idea was to show things together so that you can see connections and dialogues between different works from different countries. And I think the fact that we've got big themes like fables and folklore, that was just an obvious one where many of these great stories overlap. Journey to the West, Monkey King, as it's more popularly known as, is of course the big influence on Dragon Ball, and it also is retold in many other ways from country to country. And even the format of some Indian comics, I just noticed in previews this month that Amar Chitra Katha are listing several of their basically kind of classics illustrated format adaptations of Indian, I think, legends and myths, not so much history perhaps, but it's kind of strange to see in 2024 that I don't think they've ever been listed in Diamond previews before it finally turned up. And they won't be unfamiliar because they look like actually quite old-fashioned or traditional American comic books, which was the big influence on them, of course. Yeah, there's still big stories not being told, but just only this year, friends of mine, one of my main advisors for India, Pinaki Day, and a whole team of people there were putting on the first substantial exhibition on Bengali comics, which have sort of been underexplored, under-collected, certainly not treated seriously by institutions or art galleries or anything like, or libraries, but collectors have managed to preserve them. And there's been an exhibition on that, and a book is hopefully forthcoming. I was in Calcutta just before COVID, actually, January 2020. I didn't catch anything. And I've been in Angoulême, in fact, it was the week after. And when I was in Calcutta, my friend Pinaki was with a whole bunch of people who had found some rare copies of a comic that has never been put together or properly recognized, and they've got all the pages. And I'm not sure what would happen, whether there's going to be a reissue of it, but these things that languish only in ephemeral magazines and disappear and then are forgotten. This is a big concern for me about comics cultures in many places, and not just in Asia. Things have been lost. I'm going out in July to the Philippines. We know from you know, I'm sure, Greg, great artists like Redondo and Alcar, Alex Nino wrote a lot in movies as well. The Philippines has produced so many incredible artists over the years and still is today. There's a tremendous scene which we reflect in Asian comics. But going out there, I know the sad thing will be that so much of it has been lost just down to the fact there's no institutional archiving and the national libraries and things, and they've been ignoring comics for much too long. And the climate, just the conditions, makes I hunt for old Filipino comics, KOMIKS, on eBay. Some of the things they're selling that up, there's hardly anything there. It's like, we've got the cover and it's in tatters and things have eaten the pages, but it's still intact. You can still read it, but and there's not a lot of digitizing. It's sort of going on, but a little bit. There have been exhibitions. There's a museum set up by the late Jerry Alanguilan, which I'm going to make a pilgrimage to. It's one of my meccas. I'm going to get to go to that. But this is a major comics culture that it's coming a bit late, and hopefully more of it will be rescued and there will be more actual reprinting of it. We need to get this work also, of course, into English. It's a culture waiting to be rediscovered, as there are others. I mean, just to deviate slightly from Asian comics, one of my other pet projects, I'd love to see someone do it, and I would work with them. I can't pretend I know all about it. Mexican comics, oh my God. That's an incredible comics culture. There's a couple of books in English about them. They had probably the biggest comics culture, even bigger than Japan, certainly at the time in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and with huge circulations of stories, most of which never compiled and reprinted into any kind of book. Part of my interest in all these different various countries is that you didn't get that right. Look, you should have done this. There are moments where our comics culture could have just been different. But if either the Philippines or Mexico had actually said, we've got these successful serials, why don't we put them out as a book? But it would have changed everything, because they could have kept them in print and they would have had the whole book tradition. As long as comics disappear into newsprint limbo because they are crumbling away or being eaten by things or whatever, rained upon or whatever, and bleached, then these cultures can disappear. And it's extraordinary that Mexico and the Philippines, Mexico especially, have huge cultures that have really almost vanished. There are new things coming through, great new authors, but it's a great shame that they can't fully build on a solid archiving. So when I was in Mexico, I did go to one library which did have a lot of bound volumes, which we were able to look through. So they'd been more conscientious than, sadly, the Philippines have been. And also I was able to find just a few bound volumes of these daily little, almost digest-sized publications that came out literally 8 times a week. Because on Sunday, you got 2. You got, why on Sunday? You should be in church, I'd have thought.
You need something to read in church, I guess.
Sorry, to read when you're hiding
in your hymnal. Yeah.
We had a sort of sepia-colored one and then a green printed one. And when I was in Mexico City, only for about a week or so for a conference and meeting some collectors and artists and things, one collector was showing me artwork from I think it's pretty much unique and certainly innovated by Mexican comics creators, their photo fumetti format, coming back to that photography idea. They had the clever point of view that instead of having to organize a cast and get locations and spend God knows hours photographing people in exactly the right shot you wanted, they just got the various people who played the characters, photographed multiple times with different faces and expressions, and then they would literally physically cut out the bits of the photograph and the faces they wanted, and they would then paint in a kind of photorealistic way the locations. And it meant they could produce new episodes 8 times a week. And that's not a page or a newspaper strip. It would usually be about 8 pages, small ones, maybe only 2 pages per page. But new episodes coming out. I mean, it's a lot of story, basically. It's a unique way of making photo comics. Asheron's a clever one. I thought, why don't we bring that back?
Yeah, it's like an analog Photoshop in a way.
In a way, yes, exactly.
Yeah, the ephemeral nature of comics have been a blessing early on, but a curse when it comes to trying to hang on to these things.
Yeah, and it ties in also, of course, to do with attitudes, the very sort of snobism. I mean, the very fact that we're in 2024, the Pompidou Center is something like 50 years old. I'm not sure exactly when it opened. They've done good things over the years, but it's quite a long time. And we're still waiting for somebody like the Tate to do something serious. But the British Museum here had, in 2019, they scandalized some people, but they did a massive manga exhibition. I mean, without doubt, it's the best manga exhibition you probably ever like to see. Anything that comes after will have to compete with it, because they managed to get the fiercely rival manga publishers, who of course are controlling a lot of what happens in any kind of exhibition, and certainly lending material, to cooperate. But to do it, they had to set up a whole organization called OPMA, the Organization for the Promotion of Manga and Anime, and convinced them, actually, yes, it's quite a good idea if you actually can exhibit in the British Museum and show your author's works alongside ones from other publishers that you're competing with.
Yeah.
I've said it before, if you try to get Marvel and DC to do something together these days, they go, something that has to be branded, has to be Disney, whatever.
Yeah, Marvel's this or Disney's that. And you're like, a rising tide, all boats, everybody. And they're like,
Yeah. But they made it a unique exhibition and a remarkable one. And there's one coming, I've heard, it isn't totally secret, but it's mostly secret. But there's going to be a very interesting show coming next year to one of the big art museums in San Francisco. All I can say, it's going to have a lot of fantastic original artwork on show there. I'm not involved in it, but I've heard about it, and it's going to be wonderful.
You talked a little bit about this idea early on. How important is humility and or a lack thereof in putting together an anthology, a curated event? Because what you're saying is that your taste is good enough that other people should follow it. Does that impulse come easy to you?
I think it's a good question. The same thing applies to books, because when you're selecting any kind of historical history book projects. And the key thing I feel is that I'm always in the back of my mind is this is not the definitive and only exhibition or book. And actually, I think most curators, if they were really honest, would say they don't always get to choose to put everything in they wish they could get. It's a question of what can you get? I mean, this is obviously certainly the case with MANGASIA. We were going, this is so hard to deal with. The publishers were so obstructive, as I mentioned already, with the British Museum, what they had to do. So we had to work around it. We had to work with artists directly. All the connections came out that we could. We had the advisors helping enormously too. It's extremely complicated. And in the end, someone say, well, why haven't you got that in? Well, we probably couldn't get it. But it means that you never can tell what it's going to be. It's one snapshot, if you like, at this moment of what we've managed to bring together. But it evolves. And certainly MANGASIA and Asian comics has evolved already, because we had to renew the loans. I mean, the loans were for 5 years. We had to renew them, of course, to extend the tour now. Obviously, COVID stopped a lot of touring happening. And now we're looking ahead to an amazing venue for next year in America. Well, in North America. But I can't say any more because it's not all signed yet. We've got to get it all sorted. But if it does go ahead, it'll be for a whole year, and the best part. And we will have a chance to do some further updating. There wasn't a chance to do that with this one, but we're going to do a lot of, well, new and old things, just refreshing. It'll be version 2.0 of Asian comics.
Yeah, the definitive thing.
I don't like that. I mean, the fact that the MANGASIA book subtitle is the definitive guide. I don't want that subtitle. The American edition of my book on graphic novels, in the English subtitle, by the way, which Peter, my partner, came up with, it was graphic novels, stories to change your life. Which, of course, sounds a little bit, I don't know, new agey self-help book, perhaps. We thought these are great stories, and some of them happened, they're fantasy or their autobiography or whatever. They are things that just make you go, oh, your life is changed by them. But the American publisher, HarperCollins, it became graphic novels, everything you need to know. That's the Daniel Klaus cover. There was going to be a little starburst little sticker in the corner. So I'm putting on the accent. I'm sorry about that.
That's no, go ahead.
And it has like the 100 best graphic novels ever. And we didn't. And now we're not doing that. And we could say, look, Daniel Klaus won't let you do that because it'll fuck up his wonderful artwork. But I mean, we know publishers have to sell books. They have to pretend that it's the one and only and it's what you need. But of course, very few books are that. That was the dream job that I got handed by Matt Madden. He said he was too busy looking on the other books to do 1001. And I completely subverted that one, of course, as I always do, because many of the publishers, particularly the American publisher, I have to say, didn't want anything that wasn't in English in the book. And I managed to find enough things that had at least a tiny bit of something in English somewhere to make sure they were in. And then we had about 5 or 10%, maybe probably something around that were going to come out in English. I told them I know quite a few things that are going to come out. Some of them actually haven't yet. Unfortunately, quite a few of them have.
That's not your fault.
Well, it's just that I'm ahead of the game a bit here, perhaps.
Yes.
Fantastic project and an insane one to do because there was very little time. We only got the go-ahead after the Frankfurt Book Fair in October. of whatever year it was, about 2010 or something like that, I think. And then we had to write all the texts in by about February, March or something like that. I was in Rio de Janeiro putting together the list, starting to, and going, okay, we need to find a team. We had 60 people. Some people, unfortunately, only wrote one entry for their country, for example. We had input from a lot of people as to what should go in and to make it as varied as possible. And what was exciting about doing that book as well is that the great team at Quinto, I think it was, or Quartet, the people that packaged the book, it's a book packaging job, because they sell the project to many, many other countries, of course, was that I didn't know how it was going to look, how it was going to read, because we weren't thinking of organizing it just chronologically. When it was put into a chronology, suddenly you go, oh, wasn't that interesting? So that was going on at the same time as that. That kind of thing gave the book a whole extra energy. And then the other fun thing about these books you may not realize is that they, of course, use the same color plates. The color images are used for every edition. So we put some things in with sometimes even with whole page images, which were not really very well known at all. I can't remember the name of it now, but there was one comic from Cuba, possibly the only one from Cuba, which I thought looked fascinating. Other people in the team we shared it with saying, yeah, this looks really, really good. Why do we know about this one? And so it's in there. And because it's illustrated, it's in all the other language editions as well. So it's suddenly
nice.
Out everywhere.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very extreme project to put together, but a great one. And what's also very nice is that when it traveled to other languages, for example, there was a Czech edition, and they could substitute some of the less familiar ones that they would know about, perhaps in translation, for example, from other countries. It includes a few more of their own great masterpieces that we simply didn't have room to put in. There is no definitive 1001 for the world, and there couldn't be. How could there be?
Yeah. You are unfortunately a victim of a hyperbole arms race in at least American publishing, where we have things boiled down to like 1001 this, I can understand as somebody on the other side of that being like, I don't know, maybe tone it down a little bit, but as part of the audience.
There's even 1001 golf courses you must play before you die. And they haven't yet managed to do 1001 cheeses you must taste before you die, because America doesn't have interest in cheeses. It only has a very limited repertoire, whereas, the French have got one for every year practically. So it hasn't happened. I'd love to do, 1001 manga. There's certainly enough of those to do. That would be a fun thing.
I just want to talk briefly about your work with Peter Stanbury.
Yes.
Obviously, as I have in my notes, your literal partner in crime, because in addition to other things you've worked on, you both worked on the Best Crime Comics.
The Mammoth Book of Best Crime Comics.
The Mammoth Book of Best Crime Comics.
Yeah.
Describe your working relationship, because you've been together quite a while. How has that evolved?
Well, way back to the beginning of Escape, of course, this is where it really began. Peter brings, the vital dynamic is that I'm kind of like, can get a bit super geeky, and he is not, but he does have an interest in comics. He liked heavy metal more for the artwork than for the stories. He likes artistic expression of many kinds, including comics, but he doesn't read them anything like I do. But he also brings in a whole other set of sensibilities, and also you could argue a kind of layman's non-geek sensibility as well to it. He's also a very, very good graphic designer. So I love the way that he came up with the idea of, you'll notice at the beginning and end of, maybe you didn't know, so I can't remember how it works now, so I've got a copy in front of me here, but the Best Crime Comics opens with a black spread to set up the mood. As the microphone comes on in the first Alan Moore story, Old Gangsters Never Die, and then the last double page spread at the back is again all in black, except for the prostitute in the Jack the Ripper from Hell kind of sequel story or origin story, if you like, drawn by Oscar Zarate, which ends the book. When we're doing Escape and in all books, we look at the parade, we look at the flow of the book. When do you need to have a blow up or a spread and this kind of thing? So, but he's such a brilliant, he's much more than a designer. He's definitely a co-author on several of my books, and really, sadly, we've not worked more recently, since I've been doing my last few books, a lot with Thames and Hudson. They want to keep it in-house, which is fine. In fact, they've got very good designers there, actually very good ones, especially on the Posy Simmonds and Toby Jansen monographs. But still, we continually have projects in mind. We've wanted to work again together on a new maybe just a new annual magazine. Rather than bring Escape back, I think it's a mistake maybe a mistake perhaps to go back and think you can redo it. But probably something will come out over the course of next year at this rate, I suspect, not this year. And I'm just building up ideas for it and formats, because I think we need a new anthology. We've got good ones around, I'm sure of that, but Peter and I can bring something special to it.
I do love the idea of the counterbalance.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's your first audience in a way.
That's part of it. Yeah. And first critic perhaps as well. But also he's very good with words. Some of the best moments of writing in the books we did together early on, like manga and graphic novels and British comics, which was a particularly enjoyable book to do. Sadly, it didn't sell quite as well as the first two. The third one, because it was probably just, again, covering something not so familiar to people, but British comics about as well. And there we did mad things in the graphic novels book. He came up with the idea that we will link up all of the books, so that if you like this book, you can read another one, because across the bottom of the page, there are links with a title, I think, and a page number. So if you like Mouse, then you might like Persepolis. That's an obvious kind of one. But there were all sorts of links. So we got, wait a minute, this story's got a lighthouse in it, and so's this one. And we could so lighthouse.
If you like lighthouses,
lighthouse.
There you go. Yeah.
There's a huge genre of lighthouse comics. I think there's a couple more now at the moment as they come into my head. Yeah.
There is probably a manga genre of lighthouse fiction. Oh, man, that's funny. Again, kind of like an analog hyperlinking.
Exactly. That's how the graphic novels book worked. And then when it came to doing the Great British Comics, one of the traditions, which probably a lot of people even now don't know, even in the UK, but historically in the 50s, 60s, certainly 70s, the Beano and Dandy and many other comics would have little rhyming couplets across the top of the page, giving like a little kind of rhyme about what the story was going to be about. So we spent a whole day or more writing these silly little rhymes that we put across every page of Great British Comics. Some of them were terrible, but they were great fun to do, and our publisher didn't mind us doing it. So yeah.
It's the little things, it really is. Grace notes.
That's really what Peter brings to it, a lot of attention to detail and design that makes all the difference. Yeah. Thank you for asking, because actually, I mean, he's obviously here in the house with me, but he needs to be interviewed. I think he's one of the mysterious people and had an impact on comics in a big way, and still does in his own way. Yeah.
Well, I know a guy. We can make that happen.
Yeah.
I did legitimately want to know, but I also thought it would be nice if he was within earshot to hear him mentioned in such glowing terms. Yeah. Is there anything that I haven't touched on or haven't given you a platform to talk about that we should touch on before?
I wouldn't mind trumpeting the fact that we've done 3 very nice panel discussions as part of Comica. Is a thing which people are a little bit puzzled about. We're going to revive Comica Social Club, which went to sleep during COVID, and which we've kind of been slowly, we haven't got around to bringing it back. We're going to bring it back. And what's nice about that is it's the place where if you're in town, you want to meet comics people, come along. It's always the last Wednesday of the month at the Festival Hall, just on the South Bank in London. And so many people have been missing it. So it's good to have that back. And Comica will probably be the title of the magazine we do. And I was explaining to people just recently, well, Comica began 21 years ago, began 2003. Last year, we had a fantastic whole month season of events. This year, did just 3 panel discussions, again, in this wonderful, super exclusive club called the Century Club in Soho. It's a very nice members-only club, but they do so much fantastic programming. They want the public to come in. It's not like it's you can book up to come and see it. And they were so supportive. It's fantastic. Particularly want to thank my very good friend Ivanka Harnenberger, who does many things for comics, including the current new awards for comics in translation, the Sophie Castile Awards, which are named after the much missed, much lamented Sophie Castile, who set up Europe Comics as an online platform where you could read lots of comics, not just French ones, but many others in languages, including English. Anyway, Ivanka opened the doors for she and I to work with Century. And comic as a concept is interesting because the name originally came because 21 years ago, my good friend John Harris Dunning, who wrote Tumult and Wiper, a very good sci-fi graphic novel, came out from Dark Horse. He was working at the ICA, Institute of Contemporary Arts, a very exclusive place, but an important place for connecting with comics, because they'd done the first exhibition of comics original artwork, I think probably in the UK, certainly in a major art gallery in 1971. I saw it when I was a young teenager and was just I thought, my God, this is the original artwork. And it was original artwork, Greg, from
Mhm.
New Gods and Forever People #1.
Oh, well.
And you thought, and I didn't know at the time that Kirby
Mhm.
even left Marvel Comics. I thought, what's this? Because we didn't get all the news that quickly and over then. And some
Yeah.
we doing it? How'd they get the artwork? I never found out how they got the originals there.
Oh,
That was
man.
astonishing. Anyway, ICA, also, by the way,
Mhm.
the place where the word pop art, or certainly the concept also of pop art, was largely invented by Richard Hamilton, pre-Warhol and Lichtenstein in the 50s. Anyway, they enabled us to do a test run of the Comica Festival. And of course, COM ICA was the obvious name because it's got ICA in it. But also, it's ICA like electronica, or dare I say, erotica. And Comica, I've been telling people now, well, it's a new plural for comics. The plural comic can be comics, but the plural comic can also be comica, as in all kinds. And this word of pluralizing comics is what I'm all about, really. I mean, what I think comics should be, because they don't need to be locked into anything. We could do anything with words, anything with pictures, and we do it at the same time. Bloody hell. Incredible things. Isn't it? Don't you think?
That's fantastic. I think that's a wonderful place to end this. Paul, thank you so much for being such a joy to talk to and spending a chunk of your Sunday here talking about Comica.
I'm happy to meet you in SPX, which of course was absolutely mind-blowing for me. So much creativity all together in Washington.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.